Welcome to Oceans Unplugged. I'm Lee Gallacher, formal professional sailor, mariner, harbour authority, patrol officer, coast guard officer and lifeboatman. In each episode I'll be sitting down one-to-one with the people who push beyond the horizon. Ocean racers, explorers, rowers and the leaders behind the world's most demanding expeditions. We'll expand on the guests as we get into it. Oceans Unplugged is proudly supported by YB Tracking, the global leader in race and expedition tracking technology, helping bring the world's toughest adventures to life in real time. This is our stories, unfiltered and in-depth. So, for this episode, we've got Pip Hare with us. Thank you very much for joining us.
No problem at all.
So, I'm going to take you back to probably what for you was quite a traumatic moment. 2 o'clock in the morning. 800 miles between Australia and Antarctica, and the rig came down.
Yeah.
Tell me about it. That must have been a frightful experience.
Yeah, I can pretty much say it is up there with some of my worst sailing experiences, but I think as a life experience, it was also immensely devastating. Exactly halfway through my second Vendée Globe, 4 years of training and development, building a team in the UK, all that inertia from the first Vendée Globe and very much looking for a performance finish in the top 10. And so, the mast on a 60-foot race boat coming down when you're alone in the middle of the ocean is a pretty difficult experience, but you add to that effectively your dreams being shattered at the same time, and it's devastating.
Yeah, and for the people following us and listening that don't know the Vendée Globe, tell me a little bit more. How do you define what the Vendée Globe is? How would you explain it to someone who doesn't understand?
So the Vendée Globe is the hardest race in sailing, full stop. It is single-handed, non-stop around the world, sailed in high-performance 60-foot ocean race boats. It's kind of the pinnacle event in the world of solo sailing, and like many of those pinnacle events, it's only sailed every 4 years. We've just had the 10th edition of it, and we're now sailing boats that fly above the surface of the water through the Southern Ocean.
When you say fly, so they're up on foils and the keel's still in the water, and the speeds must be phenomenally different to sort of the first generation open 60s, and the noise must be phenomenally different as well.
Yes, they're wild beasts. I mean, they're crazy insane. And they do lift out of the water on the foils, and they can lift kind of around 2 or 3 meters above the surface of the water. And actually what happens is, because we have canting keels, the keels start to act as a foil, lifting the boat out of the water as well, which kind of blows your mind because you think the keel is designed to pull the boat down into the water. But when you're going at great speeds, then the shape of the keel fin and the fact that it's canted to one side means that keel fin starts behaving like a foil and lifting the boat out of the water. The difficulty for us is we don't really have a way of controlling the ride height. So in other foiling boats, the America's Cup, LGP, then they have controls on their rudders that allow them to change the ride height of the boat and kind of stabilise the boat in that way. But in the IMOCA class that we race, we don't have that. So they're kind of like wild beasts that leap out of the water and then crash back down into the water. And you can control it to a certain extent, but the ride is very rough. Top speeds are now around kind of 40, 41, 42 knots, but that's kind of like top speed. My best average over 30 minutes is 28 knots. But we're seeing boats now starting to average over 30 knots in 30 minutes. And my top speed for making a cup of tea is 37 knots.
That just sounds wild. It's like almost making a cup of tea on a rodeo horse.
Well, actually, that's a really good analogy. And I kind of try to describe it to people because, the thing about the Vendée Globe is, we're not in a 45-minute race. No. We are racing around the world. It's one of the very few sporting events where athletes are required to perform 24/7 for months. And we have to sleep as well. And so you kind of, you look at all these other foiling boats and you see everyone kind of constantly adjusting things and managing the speed and steering all the time. And, we're alone in some of the most remote places on the planet, and we have to stick the autopilot on and go and make dinner or have a sleep or download some weather or fix something. And you get these crazy moments. I mean, I remember one of the moments where I've actually kind of sat there and thought to myself, what am I doing? I was my the hydraulics on my keel ram had sprung a leak. And I was really close with another competitor, so I didn't want to slow down because the thing about foiling is the speed differentials are huge. If you come off the foils, you'd be doing maybe 14, 15, 16 knots. But if your competitor that was alongside you is still doing 25 knots, then, you're losing 10 miles in an hour that's really hard to get back. So you have to try and problem solve at speed. And I was trying to sort out this hydraulic oil leak, and I just kind of remember having my head and my arms kind of in a tiny compartment, and I was covered in oil up to my armpits, kind of sliding around. I had a helmet on, and the boat was kind of taking off and landing and lurching, and I was being thrown around, and I couldn't hold on to anything because I was so slippery. And I just thought, what am I doing? This is really crazy. But I think that's part of the appeal of the race. It's out there. It is absolutely out there for what we have to do as sailors and as human beings. It is absolutely crazy.
I remember Thierry Dubois, a well-known Vendée Globe competitor, many years ago, saying to me that the Vendée Globe pushes the human body and mind beyond comprehension. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, exactly. I remember kind of after I finished my first Vendée Globe and I was being interviewed and everyone was saying, what do you want to do next? And I was like, well, I want to do another Vendée Globe because I've never been so stretched in my life. I've never had to perform at such a high level in so many ways. And it appeals to me as an athlete because the competition is huge. You can have minutes between you after going around the world. But also kind of as a human being, it's testing your problem solving, your ingenuity, your self-awareness, your self-regulation, your mental capacity, and all the time you are operating on 20 minutes of sleep at a go. Who would have thought that I would ever dare to climb a 30-metre mast on my own in the middle of an ocean on a boat that's moving? But I did because I had to, because I was in the Vendée Globe, and I love the person it makes me be.
And if we sort of add that complexity of climbing that mast at sea in the Southern Ocean, and we put it back to, as you said, 2 o'clock in the morning, 800 miles between Australia and Antarctica, that could have been a moment that you're at the top of the rig and it goes. Does that go through your mind and kind of, and quite often it is literally sort of a 20 pence ring pin that's failed or some sort of carbon failure?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess the first thing is we don't know why my mast failed. we've got a lot of data on the boats. You know, we're kind of high tech, high performance, and so we're measuring load all the time. And the boats are immaculately maintained, and I put a new mast into the boat the May before the Vendée Globe. I NDT tested the mast before it went into the boat. I did 2 transatlantics. I took it out of the boat. I NDT'd it. All the rigging was new. Kind of that boat was beautifully prepared.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that the failure was anything to do with the preparation. And it wasn't, from what we can see, the boat wasn't being sailed outside of its normal working loads. There was nothing strange about the conditions. In fact, they were reasonably benign when the mast fell down. And we're not aware of any component failure. That was obvious, although most of the wreckage went straight over the side. And, you know, but I couldn't see anything at deck level that failed. So kind of the assumption is it actually was a failure of the mast itself. And that's hard, but it is, you know, it's another thing about a race like the Vendée Globe. Not one single competitor who lines up at the start can guarantee that they will finish. We all go out prepared for as much as possible. We all go out with the intention to fix every problem.
Yeah.
And, you know, in my first race in 2020, I replaced a rudder in the Southern Ocean. Yeah,
Whilst underway?
Whilst underway, yes, yeah. And we were prepared to that level. But you have to acknowledge that there are some failures that you cannot overcome. And mast failure is one of them. And in the fleet, in the 4 years prior to the 2024 Vendée, there was a 10% rate of mast failure per year.
Whoa.
And I guess, you know, when you think about it, the way I kind of described the boats falling out of the sky, you know, they're foiling and then they fall. You know, imagine all of that energy that has to go somewhere. And so there's going to be a point of failure somewhere. And that has been potentially the masts, you know, that load that goes into the mast. And, you know, to the end of my days, I will be utterly, utterly devastated that it was my turn and my mast at that time.
Yeah.
You know, I would have much preferred it was a transatlantic race than the Vendée, and I would have much preferred it wasn't exactly halfway around the world. But I knew it could happen, and it did happen.
I've spoken to many Vendée Globe skippers over the years through different involvement, and if we look back at different skippers from Thierry Dubois, Tony Bullimore, I think Patrice Carpenter may have had a failure as well. And you never know where things are going to go wrong. Also, if we look back at other British Vendée Globe sailors, Alex Thompson, he had internal failures on his structure, and he was constantly having to relaminate and rebuild because of the impact loads that are going. Because your boats are literally at that top level of performance, aren't they? You're pushing those boundaries, and you can't sort of, well, I suppose, plan for all of that. And even though you're planning the structural loads and the impacts, it's still, you're testing it like a Formula One motor car. You're pushing it to its limits, aren't you?
Yeah, and I think, you know, one of the difficult things in particular for our class is that, you know, the most brutal conditions are those conditions in the south. That's where the waves are absolutely huge. That's where the weather systems are relentless. And, you know, within my team, I probably sailed more than most. You know, my philosophy was, I'm just going to go out and break this boat before the Vendée so it doesn't break on the Vendée. And especially because halfway through my program, we retrofitted the big foils into my boat. So my boat wasn't designed with big foils. We worked with Jason Carrington and Guillaume Verdier to put big foils in. And so I very much wanted to go out and sail the boat hard to understand where the failures could be. And kind of the first 2 transatlantics I did with the big foils, we discovered some cracking in some of the reinforcing ribs inside the boat, which, to be fair, pretty much every boat at the time was finding that, because the models couldn't predict the outcome from all of that slamming. And so lots of people were finding that this secondary bonding on the ribs was failing. And so, we had a lot of work done after that to cap the ends of the ribs. And so, I would go out repeatedly, much to the upset of my technical director, who just wanted a perfect boat. I would go out repeatedly and train hard. And my aim was to come back with a broken boat, because if we'd found that failure, then we could make sure that failure didn't happen again. But you can't replicate the Southern Ocean sailing from Poole.
No, definitely not. I mean, my trips through the Southern Ocean, I think the biggest weather we had was, I think it was 67 knots sustained, and we had gusts of over 80 knots. And that was coming into Palliser Bay in New Zealand from the Chatham Islands. So we weren't even in the Southern Ocean at that stage. And so for you to be in those weather conditions in the Southern Ocean with those waves that just, there's nothing to stop them. They just grow and grow and grow. What sort of was the biggest conditions that you had that it kind of, you looked at it and went, whoa? Or as you said, why am I here?
So actually, you spend an awful lot of time avoiding them. And the bonus with the boats that we're sailing now is that we really can. We really can avoid those conditions. The weather forecasting is so good, and you're constantly adjusting your parameters around how big the sea state is and how much wind you want. And so kind of you can see each skipper taking their own individual risk profile, and the risk will change throughout the race. It changes if your boat's damaged. It changes if your competitors are doing something different. You have to pick your line. And so, the waves are consistently 4-5 meters, not massive, but it's constant. And the wind, in the Indian Ocean this time, we had a very rough time in the Indian Ocean this time, and the wind was for 2 weeks between 25 and 30 knots for 2 weeks. But the boats are just going kind of so fast, and the technique in the Southern Ocean is you're watching these weather fronts approach you, and ahead of the weather front is slightly flatter water, which means you can sail the boat faster. So the idea is you kind of pick your line in relation to the weather front, and then as it's approaching you, you go foot to the floor, pedal to the metal. And he who dares wins, quite literally. You just go as fast as you can, trying to stay ahead of that weather front. And then either when you need to, your little angel on your shoulder is saying, okay, back off now. Either when you back off or you break something, or you can't keep ahead of the front, then the front will overtake you. The sea state behind the front is really messy, and then you have to slow down. And that's kind of the more violent conditions then. But the interesting thing is, in the Northern Hemisphere, the fronts go slower than in the Southern Hemisphere. So in the Northern Hemisphere, the fronts move around, but I think between 25 and 27 knots. So in the right conditions, it's possible to stay ahead of a front for almost the whole Atlantic in the Northern Hemisphere, which is how they got the 24-hour records.
Yeah.
But in the Southern Hemisphere, they go much faster through the Southern Ocean, so they do catch you up eventually. But I guess because of that, because we're kind of playing with the wind all the time in the south, the biggest conditions are when you get forced to go to a place because of geography, not meteorology.
The islands, they always get in the way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the biggest conditions are going to be passing through around Cape Horn, because you're forced through that funnel. And then in my 2020 Vendée Globe, I went through the centre of a low pressure off the coast of Uruguay, and I saw 70 knots in the centre of that. But actually the south I was able to kind of manage quite well.
So, I mean, hearing all of these stories, obviously I know a little bit of your background, but what made you decide to be a solo sailor? Where did it come from? Because back in the days of sort of sun sail and teaching sailing, where was that sort of dream to go and be a pro sailor?
So that dream was always there. I mean, I grew up in Huntingdon, in the middle of Cambridgeshire. I did sail when I was a kid. I sailed with my family. We went on family sailing holidays, but we didn't sail actively as part of our everyday lives. I wasn't a member of a sailing club. I just went to a regular comprehensive school. There was nothing around me that, said anything other than, you're going to get your A-levels and then you're going to go to university, and then that's, that was the path. And I went on a young person's sailing holiday when I was 16 and just fell in love with the possibility and the agency and the adventure. And so I started reading a lot of books about sailing. I was reading about the Whitbread. And then I came across the Vendée Globe, and it was obvious to me that I'd kind of already decided that I wanted to be a professional sailor and I wanted to race. And I suppose, I fixated on the Whitbread then. And then I read about the Vendée Globe, and the Vendée Globe is the Whitbread course, but with no stops in the same size boats. And it's one person on board. I mean, that's the hardest sailing race on the planet. And so I just thought, well, if I'm going to be a sailor, then that's what I'm going to do. And, but there's more of a roadmap to get there now. But, I was leaving school in 1992. No roadmap to the Vendée Globe from Huntingdon.
Yeah, it's not like a conversation with a careers advisor, is it? It's like, so what do you want to be?
No. So, kind of I made it up as I went along. And the first thing that I decided I needed to do was to get a sailing qualification and actually get a job in sailing, which is how I ended up, teaching sailing and running corporate regattas and those sorts of things. And I guess I thought I would find other opportunities from being qualified and working within the industry.
So now, obviously, as you say, now there's a bit more of a roadmap. So in a couple of weeks, I'm travelling down to Lorient to go and work with the guys in the Plastimo Lorient Mini 650s. And there's obviously a lot more like college environment there. And we're certainly seeing a lot more women coming into sailing. Recently, Lee Gallacher and the team for the Jules Verne Trophy. Do you see more of a career path and more women coming into sailing? And I mean, as you know, you've inspired my other half to really get into sailing, and she absolutely adores you. So do you see any more of a change, and how do you see sort of that growing?
There's been a massive change. Like it's in the last 10 years, there has been a huge change. And because even when I did my first mini transat, which was in 2011, there were 84 competitors and 7 women. So, even then the numbers were light, but I think it's just being normalised a lot more. Through demonstrating that we can, then there's no reason why you shouldn't. which I think is it's a subliminal message. There's a lot of opportunities now being created through various schemes for women. But I think still in the UK, there's a bit of a cultural problem with accessibility. And that's not just for women, it's for everyone. And for me, I went to France from 2011, 2012. I went to France to go and train in the mini camps and kind of immerse myself in the culture there. And it was another world. I just had never felt so included and so welcome and so normal. And I learnt a lot there. And I've seen that effect grow and develop in France. And it still is kind of confusing to me why we don't have that approach in the UK, but it's something that I desperately would want to change if I could.
Do you think programs like Tracy Edwards' Maiden Project has helped at least generate a little bit more momentum towards that goal of having projects to inspire more women to get in and training programs in the UK like they do in France? Because, I mean, sailors, especially like Vendée Globe sailors in France, I mean, it's your celebrities. I've been on the docks and around Le Sable d'Olonne and seen all these kids like screaming and chasing people around, whereas here in the UK, it's totally different. And in France, even people that don't follow sailing, they really still get into it. And it's, as you say, it's such a cultural shock.
I think there are a number of programs in the UK that actually really do introduce people to sailing in an easy way, and kind of those largely I think are the youth training programs. And I'm a really big fan of sail training for not just for young people, but for everyone. You know, I think it's a very overlooked path into the sport. When we kind of think of the high performance end of the sport, we always tend to think that people started racing dinghies in a club when they were kids. But, you know I'm not the only one that found my way into the sport through sail training. And I think there are so many ways to learn sailing, but in particular, so I'm a vice patron of the Ocean Youth Trust. And every time I see their boat, it is full of enthusiastic, buzzing, happy, positive young people from all backgrounds. And it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, what your parents do, where you live. It doesn't matter. Everyone's welcome. Everyone has a job. Everyone can find something.
Yeah.
And I would just love to see more programs like that, opening up opportunities, not just into the racing world, but into the maritime industry careers, because I think there's so much for so many people to access.
Yeah. I mean, as you say, Ocean Youth Trust, their yacht Prolific, it's a lovely boat, and I've been out a couple of days with it. And as you say, to see the young people from all backgrounds on board, just having an amazing time, and you see them grow from like the second that they board, they're very uncertain of themselves and very uncertain of what's coming on. But when you see them leave after the 2, 3, 4 days or 5 days that they've been on board, they change massively, and you see them really come out of their shells. The confidence that they get, it's phenomenal.
I was in Poole at the end of the Association of Sail Training Organisation regatta in the summer, and I'd agreed that I would show the crew of Prolific, the AYT boat, around my IMOCA. And I came down, and the pontoon was just alive with just, I mean, the energy, you could feel it. Everyone had just had the most incredible week. They were all running between boats, everyone was just kind of buzzing. And I showed the crew of Prolific around, and as I was showing them around, this kind of queue on the dock developed of all the other boats. I think I must have been there for about 3 hours, just with this constant stream of people showing them around. But it was I just thought, if I'd been them at that age, I think part of the issue that we have in the UK is that all of the high performance, expensive boats are behind locked doors. You can't access them, you can't see them. Most of the time people won't talk to you. And I just thought, one of these young people here, they're going to see this boat. It's the same as me opening that magazine when I was 16 years old. They're going to see this boat. They're going to be inspired. They're going to believe that there's something flipping exciting out there for them over their own horizon. And yeah, I mean, I was so happy to spend 3 hours showing young people around my boat, answering the same questions over and over again. But when do you ever get to do that?
It's very rare. I mean, I remember, obviously it's not the Vendée Globe, but for the BT Global Challenge during 2000, 2001, being in Wellington and in Sydney, and we had school kids come round. And by the time we got to the next port, the race organisers had a package of papers and pictures and letters of these kids that were inspired. And oddly enough, I've still got them. And it's so nice to sort of see that inspiration, see that growth coming along in the industry. And as you say, it's not just organisations like Ocean Youth Club. There are others, Greek City Academy, Inner City London. And to see some of the kids on those programmes refurbish a boat and then train on it and go off to do the Fastnet race, and not only do very well in it. And it's great to see those programs. We certainly need more of them.
It's super cool. And I just think, one of the things about my career, one of the things I felt through my whole career was that I really didn't feel like I belonged, because I was different, because I wasn't from the standard sailing community, because I was a woman, because I grew up in East Anglia. I didn't feel like I belonged. And I think, if we want our sport to grow and develop in the UK, we need to make more people believe they belong. That's the key to it.
Yeah, definitely. And we are seeing more and more, but there's a long way to go in the UK, I think.
Yeah.
So where would you like to see more done, not just in sail training, within the industry itself? For instance, I was speaking to Royal Natal Yacht Club just yesterday for one of their coastal races called Vasco da Gama. And many years ago, there was one particular boat called McQueenie, a fast yacht, I think it was a 40, that did the Durban to Mauritius race. And unfortunately, they lost their keel, boat sunk, and unfortunately they passed away. But one of the lead guys on there was involved with a charity in South Africa called ICare. And they basically took street kids, taught them boat building skills, and then taught them how to sail. And also now recently I've been involved in the Cape to Rio race, where Royal Cape Yacht Club have got an academy and they've been training sailors. And in fact, the academy kids have just won the Cape to Rio race. And these were all inner city kids in South Africa. So there are those possibilities globally. We need to see more of it though.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I think it's not just about the sailing as well. For me, I am driven to sail. I love sailing, but there is a whole career out there which is not just about the physical act of sailing. It is the boat building, it's the electronics, it's increasingly the IT, it's the sail making, it's the rigging. Within a professional sailing team, we do kind of fairly complex logistics. We have to manage all sorts of buying and selling stuff. And so, there's a huge amount of possible career pathways, and it would be kind of really nice to be able to work with schools to help children or young people understand what they could do and where that could take them. And so kind of those are schemes that feed into projects that then could feed people into jobs or teams, I think is something I would like to see more of in the UK.
Yeah, I think I heard a statistic recently that the average age of a skilled marine craftsman in the UK was over 40 years old, which just blows me away that there isn't an incoming there used to be apprenticeships where you could go and do a lot more boat building or sail making and stuff like that, and that seems to have thinned out. I did hear a boat builder say, well, why should I take on an apprentice? It's so expensive to do, which is such a shame because we did have a big industry in the UK.
Yeah, and certainly kind of, I really only know about my very niche kind of end of things, but much of the talent that we would need to run a successful ocean racing team in the UK ends up going to France because that's where most of the work is, that's where the hub is, that's where the learning is. And I would like to see an infrastructure in place in the UK that provided that expertise and routes to employment where multiple ocean teams could kind of tap in and out of a wealth of knowledge, because I think that is what would help to build a culture.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, you said also like the different parts of the industry, especially in electronics as well. A lot more boats are being built, a lot more technical than I used to race. And I'm sure the systems that you've got on board, the IMOCA, there's a lot more sort of software management systems on them as well. Is that rapidly changing to the point that things are happening quicker than we can keep up?
I guess there's various levels. So the existing autopilots are not the base level autopilots. The off-the-shelf autopilots are not developing rapidly, but there's constant improvement in them. I think the big difference we've seen in the general electronics area, I would say, is the development of screens. I think screen technology has got incredible in the last few years, but what's happening is that there are now computer programs which sit above your standard autopilot, and they're kind of what you might call a smart pilot. And those computer programs are the ones that drive the boats really, really fast. And they are learning all the time and developing all the time. And their test bed is the IMOCAs, the old teams, the multi-50s, the wild ocean race boats they're being tested on. And then the next thing that is inevitably, already starting to embed is AI. And I think, the possibilities for AI on collision avoidance and kind of, I guess, the ability for AI to know how to drive a boat fast is already there. But I would say in the next kind of 5 years, we're going to see that side of things absolutely booming.
Yeah, I can imagine that the AI side of things is really going to come in with managing, as you say, those sort of performance steering systems. It's certainly something that is on people's minds, where when we're looking at electronics and navigation and AI, given global situations at the moment and GPS jamming, GPS spoofing, is that kind of a massive concern at the moment for IMOCA sailors or sort of solo sailors?
No, I don't think it is. No, I mean, in general, where we sail is not anywhere at risk. you tend to kind of encounter those sorts of problems in, the at-risk areas, and there's not a lot of people down in the Southern Ocean. No one really cares. So I don't think that's an immediate issue that I would worry about. But there is a level of security that we all need to have anyway, which is our ancient seamanship. Because it's, rather than kind of a GPS jamming situation, the most likely thing that will happen is you get a flood, or you can't charge your batteries anymore, or you just get a total electrical failure, a total power failure, and then you are back to basics. And so every one of us has to be sure that we can get safely back to the shore without all of those aids. So we need to know, how do we sail the boat without an autopilot? We need to be able to dead reckon. We've still got a compass. We can still look at the clouds and our, I don't actually, I've only got a digital barometer, so I can't look at that. But, and ultimately, yes, it is very high tech now. There's a lot to manage. But when you strip it all away, you still have to be a good sailor.
Yeah.
And that comes down to seamanship.
So just on that, mainly for listeners, and I'm a bit intrigued now as well, do you carry a sextant on board?
No. No. But so in the mini class, we did have to carry a sextant on board. But not in the IMOCA. And I guess part of the reason is that, GPSs, handheld battery driven GPSs, are prolific. And so, if you think what's going to be less risk and more help, well, it's going to be 10 GPSs and 20 spare batteries, and of course your yellow bit tracker.
Yes, it does show the position if you ask it. Actually, while we're on the subject of that, thank you for bringing me on to the subject, specifically for IMOCAs, because it's not a general product that we do for other boats. The IMOCA boats carry multiple backups obviously you have the built-in YB3i, and you have your YB3 on the rail, but you also have a unit in your grab bag for capsize, is that right?
We do, yes, yeah. So the boats early on in the IMOCA history, well, kind of doesn't really happen anymore, but there were several instances of keels falling off and boats turning over. And so for every ocean racing class, you have to ensure that you have brightly coloured anti-fouling on your keel and your rudders and on a portion of your hull, so that you're easier to spot from the air if you turn upside down. But also in the IMOCA class, we have two patches in the hull that have less reinforcement in them than the others. So they're the soft patches through which you cut to exit. We have a life raft outside the boat and inside the boat. And then we also have a through hull fitting that we can either put a YB tracker antenna through, or a VHF and an Iridium phone antenna, and that's because the hulls are carbon.
Yeah.
So inside a carbon hull, you can't, nothing will emit out of it. But yeah, we do carry that.
Yeah. So whilst Pip says about that, if you're using a YB tracker on any race, please don't put it down below, because it's not going to transmit through the carbon. It does amaze me sometimes that we get like, it's not working. Where is it? Down below in the nav station. Is your boat carbon? Yes. Oh, yes. It is rather amusing. So you've got all of that safety equipment. I mean, you said there was a period where keels were snapping off, and there was the famous ones of Tony Bullimore capsizing, being in his upturned boat for, was it 24 hours, 30 hours, something like that? And the Australian Navy got to him?
Yeah, it was a couple of days, I think, yeah.
Yeah, and then he sort of swam out from underneath.
Yeah.
So while we're sort of back onto the subject of the Vendée, where are we going now? What's the future like for Pip Hare and Pip Hare Ocean Racing?
Well, kind of my biggest challenge at the moment is sponsorship. I had a great title sponsor for 2 cycles, but as happens, they decided not to sign for a third. And so kind of I am very much trying to find an appropriate partner to get going again, not just so I can go sailing, but because kind of, as I said before, I very much would like to have some sort of momentum in the UK with ocean racing, and I'm still the only ocean racing team in the UK. So it would be nice to be able to continue that, and then maybe have other teams come and join us in this next cycle. So yes, I'm very much looking to race around the world again, and to finish my 3rd Vendée Globe.
So if we have any businesses or sponsors or potential sponsors, how can they get hold of you?
Through my website. So my website is piphareoceanracing.com. And yeah, there's a little button there that says contact me, and they can just drop me a message. But yeah, I'd love to speak to them. I mean, I think more than ever, I think the stories that we share from the Vendée Globe resonate, and they're authentic and real. And you can't make them up. And I think, the quality and the type of media that is now available from on board the boats is an incredible way for any business to speak to potential and existing customers and clients and raise awareness. It's one of those really wholesome sports to get involved with, and it's one of the few sports where, regardless of how well you do, there is still a story to tell. And I think the case in point is, halfway through my last Vendée Globe, I dismasted, and I then shared my journey building a new mast and self-rescuing into Melbourne, and that was watched by quite literally millions of people.
Yeah, I mean, just before we sat down to record, I said to you that as you were approaching Melbourne, I had messages from friends around Australia that are like, are you watching this? The flotilla that came out to meet you, and people are actually coming out to give you some food and drink as well, like, welcome to Australia. That must have been sort of a bit overwhelming as well.
Do you know, it was actually really fantastic. I felt so alone and so isolated and such a failure. It was a really hard thing to process, and it was really hard. In a way, I didn't want to come to the shore. I didn't want to come to the shore and have to acknowledge to everyone that I had failed. And to be met by such a crowd with nothing but kind words and support and love was just incredible. And people flew from Sydney or, to come and meet me. And it was the absolute silver lining to an absolutely terrible moment.
Yeah. I can't even begin to imagine sort of that emotional roller coaster, because literally you'd put out a post, I think, a few hours before losing the mast at how happy and how great things were going, and then a massive change in emotions.
Yeah. I mean, I'd really enjoyed the Indian Ocean. The boat was going really well. I could definitely see a path to kind of jumping into the next group. I'd had some good banter with Benji and Roman, and everything just felt good. Everything felt incredible. And yeah, it's 2 seconds, less than 2 seconds, and it's all gone.
As is life, sometimes it can all change rapidly.
Yeah.
So, just as a thing from Deb, my other half, her son has actually said that some of the stories that you told during your Vendée Globe, especially about moments of isolation, for a teenage boy who was going through periods of isolation, your words lifted up so many moments. So the stories from the sea can transcend so much to land. And thank you for coming on. And I wish you all the very best in the hunt for your sponsorship and for the next Vendée Globe and wherever it takes you. Thank you, Pip.
Thank you.